Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Michigan LGBTQ Community Centers Network National Voter Registration Day webinar. My name is Scott Ellis, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Director of Perceptions, located in Michigan's Great Lakes Bay region. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight, we're going to be learning more about the voter registration process, how to overcome barriers to voting, and how you can get involved in the election process. There will be a Q&A panel after the program, and I encourage everyone to please utilize the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll make sure those are covered in the panel after the presentation. Tonight's webinar is brought to you by Grand Rapids Pride Center, Perceptions, Affirmations, Outfront Kalamazoo, Human Rights Campaign, Ruth Ellis Center, Stand With Trans, Out Center of Southwest Michigan, Transgender Michigan, LGBT Detroit, and Out on the Lakeshore. I'm excited to introduce our panelists this evening. We have Christina Rissman, who's the Senior Regional Organizing Lead for Human Rights Campaign. She uses she, her, hers pronouns. Christina will be presenting our program tonight and will also be available on the Q&A panel later on. Alex Cross is the Program Coordinator for the Out Center of Southwest Michigan. They use they, them, their pronouns and love voting, helping people vote, and the census. Emmy Zanotti is the treasurer of the board of directors for Stand With Trans, a volunteer with the Human Rights Campaign, and a diversity and inclusion specialist at a Fortune 500 company. She uses she, her pronouns. And finally, Dwayne Cole is the Drop-In Center program manager for the Ruth Ellis Center. Dwayne uses he, him, they, them pronouns. And now I will turn things over to Christina.
Hey, y'all. Can everybody hear me okay? Get a thumbs up. You can hear me? Cool. Okay, so I am going to talk to y'all a little bit about voting here in Michigan. Happy to take questions at the end on this, but we'll go through this pretty quickly so that y'all have time to utilize the resources of our lovely panelists today. So thanks so much for tuning in. As y'all might know, we've got 42 days until the election, which is a little too many for my blood pressure. But I wanted to start off by getting a gauge of folks who are on the call and how you are feeling about the upcoming election. So if you can, either on your phone in your browser or on another tab if you're on your computer, go to menti.com and put in this code here. Submit a word or two, maybe a phrase of how you are feeling about the upcoming election right now, and we are going to have a little word cloud generated and see where folks are at today. And friends on the panel, feel free to also contribute. Love to know how you're feeling too. For folks in the chat, that's menti.com, MENTI.com, and then the code is 5429765. So far, we've got nervous, anxious, and hopeful, which feels par for the course for 42 days out. We'll give folks another couple of minutes to put some responses in there. We've got amped. All of a sudden, people got excited in this last one. Feels like an Emmy Zanotti entry. And for reference, y'all, the more a word is submitted, the larger it will be. So the majority of our responses right now have been anxious and nervous, which makes sense to me. So with that, nervous, it just got even bigger. Okay, before we get more nervous, I'm going to talk about how easy it is to vote in Michigan. So let's go on to that. All right. Okay, so for folks who have been in Michigan since 2016 or who are involved in politics or campaigns right now, you might know that in 2016, Donald Trump won Michigan by just 10,704 votes, which is not a ton. If you watched the DNC and heard Michelle Obama talk about how some states' vote margins in 2016 came down to just a couple of votes per precinct, she was talking about Michigan. So we really have the ability by talking to our friends and family members and by, having conversations about voting with strangers to be the difference in this election, and it is definitely doable. For reference, HRC's got, I think, 45,000 members in the state of Michigan. So we have, almost 5 times as many people as Donald Trump won Michigan by in votes in 2016. But what did that number of votes here in Michigan mean for LGBTQ folks? A lot. If you're anything like me and you get NBC news notifications on your phone every 5 minutes, you've probably gotten a couple of these and have been a little bit stressed out by the actions that the administration has taken for LGBTQ policy. I'm sure you've heard about the trans-military ban, about the administration opposing the Equality Act, which would provide federal non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ folks. A whole number of things. Honestly, this slide isn't even entirely up to date. We have the new HUD rule that would let people discriminate based on a religious exemption in homeless shelters. And since we made this, I had put that, there were 2 Supreme Court seats filled by the Trump administration and a number of district and circuit court judges, and now we're looking at potentially having 3. A reminder, though, that it is not just those Supreme Court seats, unfortunately, it is also those district and circuit court seats that also have lifetime appointments. We truly, truly cannot afford another 4 years worth of those court appointments by the Trump administration of people who have really staunchly anti-equality views on a number of different issues, right? LGBTQ and, reproductive rights and everything else. So I don't think I need to remind most of the folks on this call of all of the things that are at stake here in 2020, but this election has truly, never been a more important time for the LGBTQ community and our allies to step up and get involved. So that being said, we do have something we can do about it, and lucky for us, voting in Michigan has not ever been easier than it is this year. So in 2018, voters in Michigan passed Proposal 3. They actually passed 3 different proposals. So if you were around in 2018, the first one legalized recreational marijuana. The second one established an independent redistricting commission to counter the gerrymandering in our state. That's great news too, but keep in mind that those new districts are not going to be drawn and in place for this election. So it's something to look forward to coming down the pipe, not quite ready for us here in 2020. But what is available to us to utilize for the 2020 election is the changes that were made under Proposal 3. And Prop 3 was kind of a full overhaul of all of our voting rights here in Michigan. So we got no reason absentee voting, which turns out to be super convenient for a global pandemic. So we're working with that here in 2020. Every Michigander who is registered to vote is eligible to vote by absentee for no reason, no excuse at all. We also got the right to anytime voter registration. So it did not used to be the case that you could register to vote on election day, and now you can, which is great. I'll talk a little bit more about the details of that in the coming slides. We also got online voter registration. So it used to be, you'd have to mail in your application or show up in person to your clerk to register to vote. That's not the case anymore. It's super easy. It takes all of 5 minutes if you need to update your registration or if you need to register for the first time. We also got back straight ticket voting. If you are a longtime Michigan voter, you might know that for a very long time we had straight ticket voting, so you'd come in and just fill in one bubble at the top and be done. That wasn't the case for 2018, but then Proposal 3 got it back for us. This is particularly useful, we think, in cutting down lines at polling places, so people aren't spending as much time there. They're in and out a little bit quicker, and hopefully not having people turn away because they see a line when they walk up to vote. And then we also strengthened our provision for our military members, so there is a larger window of time when the ballots go out to folks who are in the military, and they have a larger chunk of time to be able to return that and get that back to their clerk to have their votes counted. So 2 updates that have happened since Prop 3. You might have heard that ahead of the August primary, Jocelyn Benson announced that all Michigan voters were going to get absentee ballot applications mailed to their homes. So folks were actually able to request their absentee ballots for both August and November with that application. If you didn't, fret not, there is still time to do it, and we'll talk all about how. But that was a really great addition to the Proposal 3 rights we've got. And they made it so that we can now request our absentee ballots fully online. Again, takes less than 3 minutes, and we'll walk all through that in a second. Truly this year, though, we have really had updates like every single day as we're going forward. Things are changing and developing and moving around us. So in 2018, we had this Proposal 3 with all the changes. Then wanted to point out that in May, a pretty small election. Not even every locality in the state had an election in May, but 99% of ballots cast in that election were cast by mail, and we saw a huge increase in voter turnout. This was kind of like near the peak of COVID, and most people were staying home. But, you know, we did establish that we could carry out our elections and that we could increase turnout by being able to get people to vote from home. In June, as mentioned, the Secretary of State announced that all of our registered voters were going to get that application mailed to them and launched the online request form. And then in August, we had record-breaking state primary turnout, which is very exciting because we really wanted to make sure that all of our clerks ahead of November were used to processing tons of absentee ballots and getting ready and had the capacity ready for November, where we are anticipating it's going to be obviously even huger turnout. And then just this past week in September, a couple things to keep on your radar. So a judge did rule that ballots postmarked by Election Day would have to be counted, whether they're received in the mail by then or not. We anticipate, you know, that this is going to be challenged, and who knows, I would still say if you're going to mail it, get it in ASAP, but that's something to be optimistic towards is people are fighting to make sure that the most mail-in ballots as possible are going to be counted. And then also our state Senate actually just voted on a bill that would let clerks start counting ballots before Election Day. So right now the law is that they can't start counting those until 8 p.m. when the polls close. So we are looking at seeing the House vote on that and hopefully make it so that we can get our election results a little more timely, considering we're expecting so many more people to be voting by mail. So then November, I don't know if y'all have heard, but there is a little election coming up on November 3rd. It is going to be our presidential election, and it is just around the corner. Okay, so first of all, things that you need to do before November. You need to make sure that you're registered, that your registration is up to date. If you're not registered already, you can register online. You've got to request your ballot, and you've got to get that returned and back into your clerk before Election Day. So some of the dates for those things to keep in mind. Before the November 3rd election, ballots actually first became available, and in some places have started going out September 19th. So people already have ballots in their hands in a lot of places in Michigan right now. You might hear people talking about in-person absentee voting. So you can show up to your clerk's office, request an absentee ballot, fill it out, and turn it back in all in one transaction. That's going to start on Thursday. So clerks are getting ready, gearing up for people to come in and do that instead of having to come in on Election Day, kind of avoid crowded polling places. So that is going to be happening on September 24th. The deadline to register to vote online or by mail is going to be October 19th. Again, you can register up to and on Election Day, but before October 19th is when it's going to be easiest. So after then, you're going to have to go into your clerk's office to make that happen, but it is still available to you. Also, to request your absentee ballot, you've got to have that done by the Friday before Election Day. So that's October 30th. You know, you're on your way to go pick out your Halloween costume or whatever. Make sure that you stop by your clerk and request your absentee ballot. And then the final deadline that you need to keep in mind if you're going to be voting by mail or on Election Day. Like if you are in line by 8 p.m. on Election Day, you have to be allowed to vote. If your absentee ballot is received by your clerk by 8 p.m. on Election Day, that ballot has to be counted. So similar deadlines to keep in mind. We've got to make sure that those get back in. We'll talk about some ways to make sure that those are in just a second. But first of all, I wanted to first draw your attention to michigan.gov/vote. I will say this website probably 100 times before the end of this presentation. If you don't have it bookmarked and saved in your phone or in your browser, strongly recommend it. It's really the one-stop shop for all things voting in Michigan. So if you're going to check out your voter registration, find out if you're registered and where. If you've moved recently and you're not sure if you've updated it, you can check it all out here on this dashboard. Just got to enter your name and your birth year and zip code, and it'll pull that up for you, let you know where you're registered, or give you the directions to update it. So if you are not registered yet, you can register online. The integration system looks just like this. The online system will ask you for a driver's license. You do not have to have one of those to register to vote. If you do not have one, what that looks like is you will print the form from that same website, michigan.gov/vote, and then either take that into your clerk in person or mail it in. But again, you do not have to have one of those forms of ID. It's just going to be easier to use the online system if you do have that. So registering on Election Day looks a little bit different. You will register to vote at your clerk's office, not at your polling place. So this is important to keep in mind if you run into someone who you're like, hey, there's an election today, and they're like, oh shoot, I forgot to register to vote. They can still register to vote on Election Day. but do not send them to their polling place. They should be sent to their clerk's office. You'll have to bring a proof of residency with you if you're going to register on election day. That's one of these things listed on the screen, a driver's license or a state ID or a utility bill, a number of different pieces of mail that will come with your address and your name on it. But again, that's at your clerk's office and not at your polling place. And folks don't really have to do the runaround on election day if they need to register on the same day. So if you're going to send someone to register same day, they can also request an absentee ballot at their clerk's office on that trip, fill that out and turn it in and not have to like run back to the polling place after their clerk's office. It's important to keep in mind, just make sure people know at your clerk's office on election day and not at the polling place. So requesting your absentee ballot online looks just like this. This is actually a screenshot from before the August election. So now the only checkbox that you will have the option to check will be for the November 3rd election, but you'll just have to verify your citizenship and authorize your signature. This is again at michigan.gov/vote. The printable form is also available at this website. So if you want to fill this out or you're going to take it to someone who maybe needs help getting their absentee ballot and you want to have a paper copy of that, this is what this form looks like. So I just wanted to walk through some of these steps. The first chunk here is a little bit self-explanatory, but I always like to point out that the phone number and the email address it asks for is not to get spam emails or text from the Secretary of State. You're not going to get any kind of junk mail because of this. This is exclusively for your clerk to be able to reach out to you if they have some kind of question about your application or if something weird goes on with your ballot. They have a way to reach you and they can follow up and correct any issues. The second important thing that I wanted to talk about is this box here that says, I want to vote absentee in all future elections. This has been on our application since March of this year. So a lot of people have already checked this box. This box is great. I think it's lovely that clerks are maintaining permanent absentee lists, but I want to make sure that everybody knows checking this box will get you another application mailed to your house ahead of each election. It will not automatically get you the ballot. So these boxes up here, this again was the August one that said both 2020 elections. So if somebody checked this box or both the August and November boxes, they will get the ballots for those. If they just checked this one, they're going to get the application again. So you're going to want to make sure that they either are going to go online and fill out that application or they return the one that gets sent to them. It's still a good box to check. So, you'll have the reminder for all of your local elections and all of your state and federal elections when that application shows up in the mail, but you have to be able to return that and to actually get a ballot. So something to keep in mind when you're talking to people who say, oh yeah, I signed up for the permanent absentee list. They're not going to automatically get a ballot sent to them. The rest of the application, voter signature. We've got the new address section that has more than one address because we could do more than one of those applications up in the earlier section. But if you end up not being in the place where you thought you were going to be when you apply for your absentee ballot, just give your clerk a call. They can update the address on there and make sure that it gets to the right place and finds you with your actual ballot. And then the fifth section is if you are helping somebody fill that out. That's usually if you're working for an org that's like collecting absentee applications. Most people will leave that blank, so don't worry if you don't have anything to put in that box. So another thing that is coming up a lot in our conversation with voters and that people are asking a lot about is being a little bit stressed about the USPS, and with good reason, because there are a lot of attacks on the U.S. Postal Service right now, unfortunately. So if folks are worried about their ballots or their applications being held up in the mail, make sure that they know, and I want all of you to know, that you can drop those off directly at your clerk. So if your ballot comes to you in the mail and you've got it in your hands and you fill it out, you can take that directly back to your clerk. You don't have to drop it in the mail if you don't want to. If you do drop it in the mail, you should do that ASAP. Make sure it's got 2 stamps unless your city is prepaying postage, which is happening in some places in Michigan, which is cool. But make sure that, if you don't want to be wondering where that's at, you can take it directly to your clerk. And a number of different localities have community drop boxes as well. So like where I'm at, I know the fire department's got one, and you can just go and pull up there and throw it in the drop box. You can find out where your clerk's office is and what their office hours are and whether or not you have one of those community drop boxes near you at michigan.gov/vote as well. Another important change after Prop 3 is that you can now vote absentee for your first election. So it used to be the case that if you didn't register to vote in person, you couldn't vote absentee for your first election. If you are someone like me who registered to vote and then moved away for college and then had to drive all the way back from East Lansing to Warren, Michigan in order to vote in your first election, not the case anymore. I found that this was particularly applicable to college students, but now that most of them aren't even on campus, it's just good for people to know in general. You can register to vote and request your absentee online all in one thing because you do not have to show up in person for your first election anymore. And then that ballot tracker that I mentioned a little bit, wanted to emphasize this as a great resource for anyone who is planning to vote absentee. So if you've requested your ballot already, or if you're not sure if you have, check out the tracker on michigan.gov/vote. It'll let you know if the clerk has received an application from you, and if so, from which election and at what date they've received it. It will also let you know when the ballot has gone out and been mailed to you. So, with folks being nervous about things getting lost in the mail or getting held up in the mail, if you go and check on that tracker and you see that your ballot was mailed to you like 2 or 3 weeks ago and you still haven't seen it, give your clerk a call, find out if they can get to the bottom of it. And if they need to, they can reissue you a ballot and spoil the one that was already sent to you so that no one can vote on it, but they make sure that you have ample time to get a ballot in your hands and get it back to them and returned and processed. And then we'll also update the status when that has been completed and processed back through by your clerk. So if you're worried about where it's at, check out the tracker on michigan.gov/vote. Again, I will plug this website, really the one-stop shop. So voter registration forms are there. You can also register to vote there. Absentee ballot application forms are there. You can also just do it online. All of your clerk's contact info, their hours and their location, and then that ballot tracker that I mentioned as well. So just some top-line things to remember. You do not need a photo ID to vote in the state of Michigan. If you have one, you should bring it with you if you're going to vote in person or if you're going to go to your clerk's office, because it'll make things run quicker, but not required. So if someone is telling you you need a photo ID, they are not correct. And I've got some phone numbers at the end of this that can help with that if you run into something. Also don't need your voter registration card. Again, if you're going to vote in person, you can bring that with you. It'll kind of help them guide you to like which line you should be in to keep things running smoothly, but definitely not required. If you are in line before 8 p.m., they've got to let you vote. Same goes for your absentee ballot being in your clerk's hands by 8 p.m. It's got to be counted. Same-day voter registration is at your clerk's office and not your polling place. You do not have to vote in person for your first election, and you can now both register to vote and request your absentee ballot online. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that takes about 3 minutes each. It is a really nice and quick process and a really great resource that we have here in Michigan. So these are the phone numbers that I mentioned. These are all ACLU's election protection hotlines. The first one here in English, the second in Spanish, and the third is in Arabic. I would take note of these, especially if you are working for or with an organization that a lot of people come to you with voting questions. If someone is running into, a poll worker who's telling them that they need a photo ID to vote on election day, this would be the line to call and make sure that they can get someone who knows the law to get to the bottom of that, make sure that they correct that person and that we're not keeping people from voting who should be able to vote. I would be happy to take any questions specific to this content before we open back up to the panel, but I think Scott also has a poll. We're going to see how folks are doing in the voter registration absentee area. I also can't see the chat. So Scott, if there are questions that have come in specific to any of the slides that I breezed through, happy to answer those. Oh, cool. Okay, so if you are on Zoom on the computer right now, you should have a pop-up that just came up with a few questions. The first being, are you registered to vote in the state of Michigan? So again, if you don't know the answer to this, we do have an unsure option. You can check that out at michigan.gov/vote. And then there are 3 questions total. So if you scroll in the drop box, you should be able to mark for each of these. And then you are able to submit. And then I think Scott will be able to show us all the results. Okay, looks like we're mostly registered. That's a good sign. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see the full panel.
Great, Christina. Thank you so much for that presentation. So we are going to bring up our panelists here, and we do have a question here in the chat box that I want to bring up to Christina. I'm just pulling it up here. Really fantastic question from our friend Roz. Roz asked if she, and I think any of us who have already requested our absentee ballot, should we have received those by now?
The answer to that is maybe. I have only seen a handful of my friends who have received them already. They requested them way back, but I also requested mine with the August one. So I would say, for the most part, clerks are probably going to start pushing those out on Thursday. There were only a few different areas that were actually getting them out right on the 19th. So I wouldn't fret just yet if you haven't received that. But again, that tracker is available to everybody. So you can check on there, make sure that they processed it, and it'll let you know if they've sent it out to you in the mail or not yet already.
Okay, so again, bringing us back to michigan.gov/vote. Any other questions, please feel free to pop them over there in the chat. And as we're waiting for some questions to come in, I will ask this, and this can go to any of the panelists here. Can you talk a little bit about other ways to get involved in the election process?
I
will say,
Yep, go ahead, Alex.
I wanted to kick it back to Christina. The HRC has a pro-equality list of endorsed candidates that they are phone banking and text banking for every day. And if you are interested in becoming involved in the election cycle this year, phone banking and text banking is super important. A lot of organizations are pushing absentee ballot requests and making sure people either request their absentee ballot, know how to fill out their absentee ballot, and so on over phone banking. And so you can be involved if you don't want to engage in partisan politics that way. But if you are and want to engage in partisan politics, local candidates are always looking for someone to phone bank, text bank, and even do some door-to-door canvassing with adequate protections and care. The best way is to be engaged on the field and connecting with people one-on-one to really pull people to the polls and make sure that they vote however is safe and best for them this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, very similar. HRC does have text banking and phone banking opportunities nearly every day of the week between now and election day. I think it actually is every day of the week now. And the important thing that I like to point out for everybody with that is our phone banks are typically talking to two different groups of people. So the first is HRC members and supporters, and the second is who we call an equality voter. So we've got data that we have reason to believe that this person cares about LGBTQ issues. So for the most part, we're not trying to change anyone's mind on these calls, which I find kind of stress alleviating. You're not going to have to get into a debate with anyone on the phone, but we're making sure that they know about the resources available to them to vote absentee, make sure that they're registered. And like I said, with our vote margin in 2016 coming down to just a couple votes per precinct, having two conversations with two strangers during a volunteer shift could seriously flip a precinct and be a part of really making the tides turn for the whole state here in Michigan. So I will pop the link for some of those events into the chat right now as well.
Great, thanks a lot, Christina. Emmy, how about you? Why do you love voting?
Why do I love voting? Because it's awesome. I mean, it's a constitutional right I have, and I recognize that I don't think I would have had that right 100 years ago. So, or literally would have just now 100 years ago, right? So it's, I call it the entry level job of civic engagement, right? It's it's how you test the waters. It's how you feel it out. It's empowering. It's all of those things. And then, ultimately, and we pay a lot of attention to these up ballot races at the top of the ticket, right? We talk about Biden versus Trump. We talk about, reelecting like Gary Peters to the Senate. We talk about all these things, but so rarely do we talk about local politics in our discourse. And I know since there's folks from all over the state who are going to be listening to this, right, that Holland recently passed some non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people, right? Like, I know that Ferndale just passed an anti-conversion therapy ordinance, right? We know that in Bay County and Bay City in recent years, we've talked about non-discrimination ordinances for LGBTQ individuals, right? So pay attention to who your county commissioners are. Pay attention to who your city council members are. Pay attention to who's running for mayor if these things are on your fall ticket. I know municipals were mostly last fall for a lot of cities, but pay attention to these things. Pay attention to your county prosecutor. We've been talking a lot about racial injustice this summer and racism in our country, and how do we reach the roots of that. So pay attention to who you're voting for sheriff, right? And who you're appointing to judicial seats. So these things are super important. And to me, voting's it's the single most empowering thing I can do before I start reaching out to other people and telling them about voting. So that's why it's so important to me.
Great. I'll keep going around with that same question. Dwayne?
For me, I know it's kind of new to me. So I'm 23. So when it comes to I'm 22 now, about to be 23. So when it comes to voting and stuff, I know for myself coming up, it was kind of like harder to really get education around that. Like going into politics, like it's a lot. And I wanted to piggyback with the question that Christina answered a little bit about how we can get involved. I think it's really important that people who are really knowledgeable about politics and just really when it comes to voting, like to really have those conversations with people that may be ill-informed or may not have as much education around that. Because when you really think about it, there's a lot of different intersections into like why people, or intersections and reasons as to like why people may not have been able to vote like as much as they have been able to now. When you think about transportation, when you think about a lot of the times that people may think that there are certain barriers that may restrict them from voting. People may not be aware that, oh, even though I don't have an ID, I'm still able to vote. So a lot of those things really play into the fact of why people may find it difficult to vote, or why people may be a bit hesitant, because they, like, upon first glance, a lot of people may think, oh, there's a lot of barriers when it comes to voting. So that tends to like leave people a little bit on edge and kind of make them not want to. But I think once you have those conversations and once you have that knowledge and you share that intellect and stuff like that, and really like talk to people about, yes, there are other ways for you to do this, and like really work with people and let them know that there are ways of going around it. And I know it may seem like a lot of work, but once you talk to people that you care about, and once you let people know about a lot of the issues that really are important to you, like it'll kind of be like a second nature. Like you're pretty much just educating and empowering someone who you care about to make those changes. Because I know another thing that I really wanted to kind of touch base on is like, it may be difficult for certain people when it comes to voting, because when you really think about a system that sometimes may not take into account the other variables that go into other people's lives. So you never know like how sparking a conversation or talking to someone like might change their narrative or their thought about voting. Especially when you think about like different people, because I know for myself, I could speak from my own personal experiences. Growing up, I knew that voting was really important, but at the same time, it was still prioritizing survival over that. When you think about the fact that there are people that are going through homelessness, couch surfing, different things like that, you have to take all of those variables into account, and then really think about the fact that, yes, people may sometimes think, oh, well, let me prioritize my survival before that. But once you really ask those questions, like really get to talking to strangers, talking to people that you love, like asking them like, what are their thoughts about voting? Why are they against voting or anything like that? Like sparking those conversations and getting those answers could really help to change someone's narrative about voting, especially in the direction that we're going with the availability of absentee voting, the ability to really, I don't know, it's really more accessible now when you think about comfort and when you think about being able to do it from home, and then also asking questions and utilizing other organizations too is really important, because there are organizations that really can help out with those barriers. So when people have barriers to, oh, I don't have an address, like there's organizations that will allow you to use their address in support of that. So really like thinking about different ways and then like sharing those resources with people and asking them about what their experiences are and restrictions could really help. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Dwayne. Now, somebody that I know loves voting, this was part of their intro, is Alex. So would you care to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, and I just wanted to hop on to one of the points that Dwayne mentioned. A really awesome thing that Michigan has specifically is that if you are experiencing homelessness, you can register at a street corner to vote, and you can then go to the clerk and do that absentee ballot application process and fill out your absentee ballot. So homelessness, that is a barrier that Michigan is actively trying to remove, which is great because Dwayne is right. The system has a lot of barriers in it. And the most empowering thing that we can do as people who are educated is share that political education with other people, because our laws are our society's morals codified. And unless we actively participate in voting and we show that our values are important and the morals that we support are in every single layer of politics, from drain commissioner up to president, then we are not expressing our voice and not showing what's important to us as a voting bloc. And it is without a doubt, as mentioned before, this is an entry-level position into civic engagement. Voting is what we can and should do. Anything over that, whether you're involved in campaigns or actively in educating somebody else, talking to strangers, helping people register to vote, helping your grandmother register to vote, is what you can do. So voting is what you should do, and anything over that is what you can do. And I want to say, Christina, you only said michigan.gov/vote 5 times. So I'm going to say it a couple more times. I'm originally from Connecticut. We don't have an amazing tracker system like that. The state here in Michigan is really helping you keep track of your ballot and putting the power in your hands by saying, I'm going to track my absentee ballot application, receipt, and process. And that's so exciting. You have the ability to track your vote from beginning to end. And that's available at mi.gov/vote. And I lost my train of thought because I just love that website so much. It's the most important website you can go to for this election cycle if you are registered to vote in Michigan. And vote down ballot, because at the end of the day, all politics are local, and your vote local matters just as much as your vote for a federal candidate. Our drain commissioner is super important. Who we vote for sheriff is super important. We are keeping our community safe and cared for through the ballot box. And I can't think of a better way to express that we live and care for the society that we've made than by showing our values every single day when we vote. And that's why I love voting, Scott.
Thank you so much, Alex. Christina, can you touch on opportunities for people to work an election? what's available? Where do you go to learn more about that? And kind of get trained up, and how do we become more represented in this whole process?
Yeah, that is a great question. I actually do not have the link to apply to be a poll worker readily available. I would bet that you can find it at michigan.gov/vote. But I'll find that and send that in the chat after. But so we're experiencing a nationwide poll worker shortage right now, right? So we don't have, typically an election year, if you've ever voted in person, like the people who check in and make sure everything runs smoothly are like skewed a little older, and it is not super safe for those folks to be out when there is a pandemic going on. So we are experiencing a poll worker shortage, particularly in Detroit, particularly in Flint. And I will say that you do not have to live in one of those places in order to volunteer to be a poll worker at one of those places. And those people are the people who sometimes, like we talked about, we want to make sure that they know you don't need a photo ID to vote. And we want to make sure that really informed and really passionate people who care about folks having access to cast their ballot are in those places so that things are running smoothly. They do, a pretty extensive training before those people get involved. So you don't have to know all of the rules. They will make sure that you have them before you get into place. But we are in need of poll workers, and I will make sure I send that link in the chat after this as well.
Thanks a lot. One more question here before we wrap up. I want to touch on the misconceptions that we see about absentee voting versus voting by mail. And I know we see this controversy come up pretty often, but essentially they are the same thing. They are the same thing. That's not essentially, they are the same thing, but it becomes very divisive when we're talking about absentee voting versus voting by mail. Can you just reiterate that, Christina?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to talk about because this is what I wrote my thesis in grad school all about. So yeah, they are super duper the same thing. The reason that differentiation has come about is because the president who said mail-in voting is bad, we're like, but you've been doing it for many, many years. And so he had to find a different word for his use of a mail-in ballot. Here in Michigan, we have just a bunch of great resources and rights available to us, but we also have a really great system in place to make sure that our election process integrity is maintained and that, everything goes smoothly and that we're not going to end up with all of this mass voter fraud that you hear all about. When folks are talking about that, make sure that the president tweeting that people can just print ballots is nowhere near possible in the system that we have in place. So like I said, we've got ballot numbers with signatures that are cross-checked to your voter registration. If your ballot does get lost in the mail, they will spoil that ballot to make sure that no one can vote on it because we have such a good record of which number belongs to who. So that is how we're making sure that system works well. And when people are, really stressed about voter fraud, I like to remind them that the Bush administration actually started an entire department to specifically find instances of voter fraud that they have been talking about for so much. And after several years of finding nothing, they disbanded because it's just not an issue the way it is made out to be by certain individuals. So our system here in Michigan is set up so that we can vote safely and securely and that the integrity of our election is maintained. And I have all the faith in the world in our Secretary of State for making that go smoothly in November as well.
Any final thoughts from any of our panelists?
I would just piggyback really quick on what Christina was saying. I mean, there's been out of 250 million ballots cast by mail or something like that, there's been 143 criminal convictions, which is a rate of and I don't even know if I'm going to get all the zeros right in this decimal, but it's 0.0000006% or something like that. And someone can fact check me on that if I was off by a decimal point or a zero. So it's totally made up, right? It's totally fabricated. And until recently, it wasn't a partisan issue, right? There's 46 states in our country that have some form of mail-in voting available to all voters. And of them, 22 of them have Republican governors and 24 of them have Democratic governors or something like that. So this was it's very new that this has become a partisan issue. And, part of it is because we're learning that the majority of the country leans one way over the other, and that could shift the balance of power in one set of people's favor. And so we're seeing this start to be attacked, and it's just worthy to call out that it's totally safe. It's actually during COVID, it's the safest way to vote, right? We could be saving lives by encouraging people to vote by mail. So think about all that as you're getting ready to cast your ballot this November.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Christina, Emmy, Alex, Dwayne. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. I want to again thank all of our community center partners who helped bring us this event: the Grand Rapids Pride Center, Perceptions, Affirmations, Outfront Kalamazoo, Human Rights Campaign, Ruth Ellis Center, Stand with Trans, Out Center of Southwest Michigan, Transgender Michigan, LGBT Detroit, and Out on the Lakeshore. Thank you all for being part of this. Happy National Voter Registration Day. Have a great week, stay well, and remember to vote.